2014, I rescued a young raven, and I'm painting these animals and having a blast doing that. But this put me in a whole different direction, and this became my muse. And I was invited to do a show at the Museum of Art and History in Lancaster, and they asked me what subject matter, and I just said ravens. And once I started painting ravens, there was no going back. So Peanut was this bird that I rescued, and I had her in my home and studio for about 10 months, and she just provided me with all kinds of poses and inspiration to create this body of work. With painting ravens, it seems like it's more of a spiritual journey now after I met Peanut. I work on about 6 or 7 pieces at one time. They're usually 26 by 40. They're large sheets. I paint on UPO, which is a very synthetic plastic material, and I use a lot of water, and I paint flat. But I paint in such a process where each piece might take 6 to 8 hours to dry, so I'm always working on a lot of pieces at one time. Sometimes they're all over the floor, sometimes they're on my table, but they're all spread out. And some pieces might not work as well, and then I have to put them away in a file cabinet and let them sit for a while before I get a chance to figure out why they're not working. I lightly sketch onto the UPO, and then I lightly draw the image down, and then I just start adding my water first and see where I want my medium, which is watercolor, to stay. Wherever the water isn't is where the medium won't go. So I don't have to really, if I have a big glob of water on the paper, it stays in that spot. And with UPO, even if I'm not happy with where I put my paint, I can wipe it right off. It's wonderful stuff. Everybody should try it. You can buy it at any of the art stores. It comes in pads. It's just a sheet of paper. It's plastic, and just play with it. So that is basically the bulk of the work is done on UPO. I do paint on canvas. Occasionally I do paint with acrylics. I do paint with wax. I do try other techniques, but UPO and watercolors are my go-to. When I'm painting, when I add the watercolors to the wet, I have rock salt, and sometimes I will grind it up to little pieces, or I just leave it in big chunks. And I might just take a little touch of some rock salt and just throw it into a spot around the eyes, because the eyes is where I want the focal point to go to. And the salt will, when the water evaporates out of the medium, the salt leaves some kind of a texture. And depending on the size of the salt, the type of texture I will get. And then depending on my weather, if it's really cold outside, if it's 32 degrees, it dries very slowly and I get a completely different effect. If it's very hot outside, it dries very quickly and it's another effect. But it's kind of a chance of what I'm painting. When I paint, I let the medium do its thing. And whatever comes out, then I come back in and then I use my skills and my knowledge to fine-tune that process. And then the eyes is where I really want to come in, and I have control of what I'm doing. But the watercolors decide, for me, the personality of the painting. Sometimes I'll go in and I'm going, okay, I want to paint a real happy little raven. I come out when it's finished, it's very menacing, it's very serious, and it's because the watercolors did some unusual techniques, and I left it because that's where it was going. Really watch when I let Peanut in the studio, because she would grab a paintbrush, and they're very expensive paintbrushes, and she would be shredding the brushes like crazy. So the first few times I had her in the studio, she was welcome to be on top of the table and kind of watch, but after she was peeling the tape off and picking the salt, she did like to go in there and pick the salt off the pieces as they were drying, or when they were dry. And she definitely kind of made it interesting. She was entertaining, but at the same time, it was like having a whirlwind in there that could do destruction to your studio in 10 minutes. So I did have to really, we kept that to a minimum. She wasn't really, when everything was put up when she was invited in, or she wasn't allowed on the painting table. You know, with animals, it's always, I don't know, you can gain a lot from being around animals, and they feed into my art. I sit there and I spend a lot of time looking into my dog's eyes, looking into the cat's eyes, looking into the bird's eye, and trying to figure out what they're thinking or what's going on inside of them. So I think my work tends to pull more out from within than from without or from outside. And so by looking into them, when I paint, I want to paint the essence of the animal, not the form. So the pieces are more abstract, and some of them are not as abstract as others, but the real focal point will be the eyes, is where I spend the time. And a piece like Keeper of Secrets, if you look at it, it's very layered, but then you look at the eye, and the eye has a lot of has a lot of emotion. I feel like it has a lot of emotion, and it means something to me. But when a viewer looks at my art, I hope it means something different to them. It's kind of what their experiences with their pets or animals or whatever, and so it can bring that to when they're looking at my art. And I don't know if it's a bird or a cat or a dog. It's just, if you're an animal lover, you'll enjoy the artwork. And that's what I try to convey, is when I'm painting, I want to paint from the perspective of the animal. When I lost Peanut, it was hard to paint her image, and so I did go into some abstract work, and now I'm back into painting more of her form. And like the Red Devil, that would be something that just captured her orneriness, because she was an amazing little creature, but she was very ornery, and she was very destructible, and she wasn't something that was lovable, or you would not want to hold her, or you could, but you might get pecked pretty good. There's a couple of pieces where they're flying, the ravens are flying. It was very hard to paint those images because Peanut wasn't really flying. We did a couple of times, we would hold her up and she'd kind of flap her wings, so I got the painting Nevermore from that image. So the wings are spread out, and but almost 90% or 99% of these images are from a pose that I had maybe taken a picture of, and could look at her and then go back and then look at the picture too. And then I did a lot of research into ravens, because at the time when I found her, I wasn't sure if this was a raven or a crow, and I should have known it was a raven because that's all we have in the area. But I did some research, and a month later I knew this was a raven I was dealing with. But when you read about ravens, there's all this legends and folklore and myths, and it was kind of fascinating to see how the raven has impacted so much of our literature and our art. The bird is incredibly, what I read, they're right up there with the apes and the dolphins. And she was incredibly intelligent. So when you're watching this creature firsthand, you start understanding why they would weave these beautiful stories around the bird, and it made sense. And then you understand too, when you watch them feed on a mouse or a quail, it's kind of gruesome, and so you would see why they would get some of the negative legends surrounding them. And now I've been asked to do a mural in Lancaster, so that'll be a challenge. I don't know how I'm going to do that because I paint flat, so I'm going to be painting on a wall. It's going to be quite big. My work usually has to sit for 24 hours as it dries, so I have to figure out how to get some kind of unusual effects on the wall. But I'll figure it out. I'll do something. Maybe I'll figure out something. But I am going to paint either one raven or a pair of ravens, and it's going to be on a wall of a building in Lancaster by the museum. It's going to be an attorney's law firm building, so we'll see.